first thing I suggest you should do is go ahead and touch some metal that you may have around before touching PC components, or if you have a strap that you can get into your hand, wrist, or into your leg, that will be even better. This is to discharge yourself from electrostatic current that you might have, so you don't risk damaging your components. After you do that, basically the first thing is the motherboard. I usually grab it and put it over the foam that comes with the motherboard, and I put them on top of the box of the motherboard, which is it helps you a little bit with the build. And that's it for the motherboard. Next things, you go ahead and grab your CPU, carefully take it out, obviously, then lift the retention arm from the motherboard so the socket is ready to receive the CPU. Then obviously, after you take out the CPU, being very carefully, all CPUs have a notch or a little arrow on one of the corner, which should align with the same arrow that can be on the socket. So you should line those two arrows together, and in this way you are going to be sure that you are going to install the CPU correctly. But in the case of AMD, it's a bit easier because AMD CPUs are with pins under the CPU, so when you put it on the socket of the motherboard, the CPU should slide in, and if you wiggle a little bit, you will see that the CPU will not move. So in this way you are sure that you have placed it correctly. But the main way to tell that you have installed your CPU correctly is lining up the little arrow on one of the corner of the CPU with a little arrow on one of the corner of the socket. Then you put down the retention arm so it will lock the CPU in place, and basically the CPU now is installed. Then we go ahead and grab obviously the CPU cooler. In my case, my CPU cooler, the boxed one that came with the CPU, has pre-applied paste, so I don't have to apply paste, thermal paste to my CPU. If you don't have pre-applied paste, or if you don't like the pre-applied paste that the cooler already has, obviously you can wipe it out with alcohol, and then you can install your own thermal paste if you want to get an aftermarket better thermal paste. But I think that for this build, this thermal paste is going to be okay. In my current situation, as you can see, the brackets on the motherboard are in the way because my CPU cooler can be installed with the screws. It doesn't need the plastic brackets. But maybe you may have an aftermarket cooler, or a cooler that can be installed with the brackets. So if that's the case, that you don't need to remove them. But I had to remove those from my motherboard because, again, my CPU cooler is installed with the 4 screws, which are perfectly aligned with the backplate that my motherboard had already in it. So I just have to screw them down. Obviously you have to screw them down little by little and going on cross pattern ways. So basically you go and tighten the screws down in diagonal motion, so you get an even spread out of the load, and obviously of the thermal paste that is going to make the contact between the cooler and the CPU. After you have tightened the screws all the way up, then you can wiggle a little bit the cooler just to make sure that the thermal paste is applied evenly. Then we are done with the CPU, and the next step is going to be the memory. Now the memory, it depends. In my case, the CPU cooler doesn't interfere with my memory slots and with my memory sticks, so I can install first the CPU cooler and then the memory. But in some cases, it may happen that your CPU cooler may interfere with your memory slots, so it does not let you install the memory if you install it first. So you have to check it before you install the CPU cooler. In my case, I'm fine because in my configuration, I'm going to use slots A2 and B2, which is basically the second slot from the CPU and the last slot from the CPU, because that's what the motherboard manual said for my particular memory. So I'm going to be fine installing the memory later. And to install the memory is pretty straightforward. It's very easy. You just open the little clips on the motherboard, and then you grab your memory, align the notch on the memory with the notch on the slots, and you just press it down evenly till you hear a very distinct click. And in this way, you know for sure that the memory is installed and is making proper contact. So that's for the memory, very easy. And then after the memory, we go ahead and grab our GPU, or let's say that I do it this way. I install next the GPU, and the GPU is going to be very easy. You just again press down the little clip that is on the PCIe 16 slot on the motherboard. Some boards may have this clip in a sliding motion, so basically you have to slide it out, install the GPU, and then you have to slide it back into position with your hand or with a screwdriver. But in my case, with this particular board, you just press the clip down. Then when you install the GPU, it will lift this mechanism up again, which is going to get the CPU locked in position, and it's not going to move. And now comes the jankiest part of the build, the old shoe holder that I am using as an open case. And yeah, those I have cleaned the shoe holder. Those are just scratches from the usage of this shoe holder. So yeah, this is not dirty, but those are just scratches and let's say deterioration over time. Then I just get what I have installed till now and put it over it and begin with another step. Now, for the people that may have a case, now you can basically install your IR shield into the case and then put the motherboard in, but without the GPU. The GPU is going to be after. So this is the difference if you have a case, and then the other steps are going to be the same. Obviously, the PSU is going to be installed already installed into the case, but in my case, I'm going to install it now. So I will connect all the cables that I need for my build, and then we'll connect them to the motherboard. Normally, the first cable is going to be connected is the 24 pin for the motherboard. Then don't forget, obviously, to connect the CPU power cable. In my case, it's only an 8-pin CPU power cable. You might have 4, or you might have 8 or 6, or 12 maybe. It depends on the motherboard that you may have. And obviously, I forgot to mention that after you install your CPU cooler, obviously we need to connect the fan to the CPU fan pins. So you don't forget that. Sorry, I forgot to mention. So after that, we installed the 24 pin, the 8 pin for the CPU. Now we install obviously the hard drives to the SATA connectors, and obviously to the PCIe power connector on the PSU. And then after the hard drives, I'm going to install the power cables for my GPU. Let's press the button, and don't worry if the CPU fan cooler is not spinning, because for the first time it may happen, and the first boot may take a little while because it's going to do some diagnostics before it boots. Mine took around a minute to boot up. To tell the truth, yeah, I was a little bit worried that there was something went wrong, but technically, if the boot ends up being more than 2 minutes or 3 minutes or even more, and it doesn't show anything into the screen, first make sure that you have connected all the cables good, and then recheck again. If that doesn't work, then you definitely have to go a little bit deeper. And as you see, now we have a post and already into the BIOS on my PC, and everything is recognized correctly, as you can see. Okay then, so that was my build. Hope you guys like it and hope you find this video helpful. If so, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also turn on notification so you never miss one of my janky builds. But hey, again, it's not much, but it's my PC, and I really think that it's a very functional PC for the price, and obviously the way I build it, it's going to stay cool and it's going to stay, I think, reliable. Right then, thanks again for watching, guys, and as always, catch you on the next one. Bye bye.